Madam Speaker, this includes the initial reading of House Bill 241 title.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. Those of you who have been in this room with me for some years know that in previous General Assemblies I have released bills around suspension of rules, including House Resolutions 6 and 7 from the previous two General Assemblies. These made it more difficult to suspend rules rather than having an arbitrary majority vote. And the reason we did that is because of situations like what are in front of us. In a statement made earlier by the leadership, it was said that stakeholders were brought together in order to discuss bills such as the one that's in front of us. The problem is, without a committee system, and that's the reason, of course, we are suspending rules, the stakeholders were brought together were only ones that were allowed by the majority party, by those in majority leadership, rather than a committee system which would allow open to anybody. So in other words, the people who are in charge of the agenda are also the people who took in the stakeholders to listen to their concerns. This could be why we have so many amendments to House Bill 241 and 242 coming up in a few minutes. This lack of public input silences the public. It silences the minority of public opinion, and it forces us into a situation to suspend rules, which also means that the Speaker herself cannot rule certain amendments out of order like she normally could on other legislation. This was unnecessary. It simply wasn't necessary to do this. We could have had committees. A lot of these issues could have been vetted out in our normal open government process. But to turn around and say, oh, well, we talked to stakeholders and everybody's on board, to then have amendments such as these on important bills that affect the public, to then say, oh, well, this is an oppressive situation, we have to do this. No, we did not have to do this. This suspension of rules is a slap in the face of the process, which has already been mentioned by Representative Urick, and it's a slap in the face that the people who will be affected by this, who didn't have the capacity to come to the General Assembly, to voice their concerns as they would if this was a normal process. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on the suspension of rules, not because I don't necessarily support helping the people, in particular in this case I believe it's Newcastle County, but because we have a process for a reason. And Delaware's an open government state. In other words, we allow something that most other states don't. We allow the public, we invite the public, we encourage the public to come testify on bills that affect them. And that has been denied here because of the lack of committee system and the need for a motion to suspend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spiegelman. I just want to remind you that the very first motion to suspend rules was made by your caucus member, and it was a motion that was made to suspend rules to hear a bill from another caucus's bill. So I just want to remind you of that when you're making this comment.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would like to point out that that bill had a committee hearing.
Thank you so much. Leader Harris.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to say that I think most of us would agree that we would prefer for all of this to have been able to go forward in our general, our normal session in January through June. Unfortunately, the time frame for when these taxes fall on the people of Newcastle, of which I'm not a resident nor do I represent, happens before June. And so it was see them ahead of time, but we didn't. And so this is where we are. And so I do think it is the best choice for us to move forward with this motion to suspend rules so that we can, again, assist some of our taxpayer friends and family across the state, but most specifically in Newcastle County as they have this burden for the moment.
Representative Rashid.
Madam Chair, privilege of the floor, please.
Madam Speaker.
I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, privilege of the floor, please. Thank you. I wanted to respond to Representative Harris's comments about being best choice, giving assistance to the taxpayers, and what I've seen through this process in the last couple of days, and also today, has been nothing short of confusion and chaos. Our job here in this chamber is to protect the residents of Delaware. But today, no one in this chamber can say with authority of what these bills will do in the short and long-term impacts on residents, small businesses, on our taxes for the future of Delaware. And what we have seen throughout the last 6 months, but especially in this last week and today, is a lack of leadership to admit when they are in over their heads. We should pause. We should get the experts in the room to talk about what tax implications look like for residents. We should get the schools in the room. We should get the residents and create sound policy that is going to affect generations of Delawareans potentially. As we've said before, there's been no public comment, no committee process. There is only one thing that can happen today, and that is lawmakers screwing up our tax policy, our economic development, our prospects for jobs now and in the future for Delaware. We need to pause, and we need to look at what these policies and what these bills actually are going to mean for the residents of Delaware, instead of just trying to do something. This is not good policy, and what we're doing is stacking bad policy on decades of bad policy. We need to pause and get this right.
Your hands.
I have 2 minutes on that. I will just say that, we've had these conversations with the counties and school districts. We've also received emails and phone calls from constituents, so we've heard their cries for assistance with this. Not much would be different than what they would be delivered to us in an office. I mean, with that said, we are up against a time. And as I said in my comments, if we could, we would wait for January. I understand again that these amendments that were put upon us at the very last minute are tough to make decisions on. But even with them being, us seeing them in the very 11th hour, to be quite frank, we still contacted each of the counties. We had input from the school districts to figure out what does it mean for them. And that still does not discount the emails and calls that every single one of us have gotten, even if we do not live in Newcastle. So we are saying that process matters, and it absolutely does. And some people have bucked that process. But that doesn't mean that we should fix the problem. And that's what we're here to do, is fix the problem. And that's why we're saying, move forward with this motion to suspend rules.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, privilege of the floor.
Granted.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just in connection with what we're doing here today, the bills that we are hearing were the ones that were rushed through. Some of the ones that we aren't hearing, we've known for months and years actually. We didn't need a motion to suspend rules, we could have acted before it happened. HB 245, we've had different versions for 4 years. But we just didn't suspend did do it correctly. But a lot of the things you're talking about, solving the problem, I mean, let's be real, that's a political theater comment. That's not real. We're not going to solve the problem because until there's school funding reform, we're still kicking the can down the road every 5 years as we now continue to do the referendums, have this many school districts that overlap into different counties on top of an antiquated funding formula that has been around for 80 years. I don't know about you, but my kids have definitely changed in the last 3 years, let alone the last 8 years, on how we educate them. So I appreciate what you're saying. The process is important, and while these are trying times, we had the ability to do some of these bills beforehand. To say that we didn't have the opportunity to and can solve the problem now is false. I appreciate that Representative Bush didn't even stand up and object to me trying to suspend rules for his bill, because it's something he and I have worked on together forever, and regardless of how you voted, you know it's the right thing to do. But because I did it, I understand you can't do it. But at the end of the day, and if you really want to get all stakeholders involved, if anyone's ever been to an escape room, right, my son's been into it now, he's 14, we would all get in a room between now and January, and we would come out with a new funding formula. We would come out with school district consolidation. We would come out with other ideas on how to then solve this problem, because all it did was open up the real problem. The leadership of Newcastle County in the past, the failed leadership, is why we're actually here today, because they kicked the can down the road. So now we have over 5,200 appeals in Newcastle County for people that are going to pay the tax from the appeal that they won't hear before the money's due. So if we really wanted to do it correctly, what we would do is say, Newcastle County, go back to the old passcode from last year, admit fault, and redo it. The public isn't looking like we're magicians and we're going to solve the problem. They're looking for somebody to admit they're wrong. To me, it's our former governor, who was our former county executive. But that's just one man's opinion. Thank you. Sure, current, past, whatever. Thank you.
Representative Burns.
So I wish to address the chamber. I realize the consternation over process and that, but in my district, I have many people.